How did the school lunches look throughout history? Were they big and hearty, or perhaps scarce? What did the children eat back in the day? How and why did we even come up with the idea of school lunches? Let's rewind to the Industrial Revolution. When steam engines were churning and factory machines were whirring, kids didn't just have textbooks to keep them busy. They had to work long hours in factories. However, with the rise of public education came an equally important issue. All these children spent more time at work than at home. But how did school lunch programs start, and what were these early meals like? At the time, factories were booming, cities were growing, and people were working harder than ever before. Kids were no exception. There was a need for labor in factories, and children were recruited in droves to help with everything from textile production to coal mining. The problem was that kids worked long hours in the factories, sometimes starting at the crack of dawn and working through the sun setting. What did that mean for their meals? And no, nutritious, balanced lunches weren't happening. At the same time, urban centers grew and the population moved from rural to urban areas, and public education systems began to emerge. Schooling, at least for some kids, became a formalized part of life in Europe and America. Classrooms became overcrowded, particularly in cities. Sending their children to school was an extra burden for working-class families who had already little to spare. But it wasn't just about learning. What about feeding kids during their long hours at school? How did schools even think about feeding children who were working in factories, eating irregular meals, or no meals at all? You may be surprised to learn that school lunch programs were actually invented out of necessity. In 1853, Boston began its first official school lunch program. This wasn't even close to the cafeteria extravaganzas we've come to know and love. No pizza Fridays or chicken nugget days here. This early lunch program aimed to provide something far more essential: a good filling meal for kids from lower-income families. After all, if kids were going to school instead of working in the factory, they had to have something to get them through the long day. No gourmet salads, no exotic fruits. These early school lunches weren't fancy. Instead, they concentrated on hearty, practical foods. Soup, bread, and stew are what I think of when I think about what children eat for their school day meals. Simple but nourishing. The program was aimed mainly at children from working-class backgrounds, and many were used to irregular and often insufficient meals at home. This early school lunch program was more than just about feeding kids. It was a lifeline. It kept children in school rather than going back to grueling factory work. This program, however, was limited. It wasn't something that was available to every child, but it was a big step forward, and it was a sign that kids would get better care while in school. Imagine the shock of kids from the 1850s time-traveled to 2024 and saw all of the choices we have. They'd ask, "You mean I get to pick pizza, burgers, and tacos every day? But I only had a bowl of stew." They'd be floored. Boston's early effort at school lunches was a small step, but it demonstrated that there was a real need for formal school meal systems, especially for the children of working-class families. As more schools began to appear, the idea of school lunches as a public service to ensure the well-being of students started to gain some traction. The role of schooling also changed as the Industrial Revolution continued, from a privilege to something more accessible to all. There were, of course, still major hurdles to overcome. The real problem for many working families wasn't just the quality of food, it was the cost. The schools couldn't afford a meal program for every child, and many parents were stretched thin. School lunch wasn't yet a universal right. It was something you only got if you could afford it. Picture yourself as a kid in the 19th century, going to class, hungry, and hoping today might be the day you get that hearty stew. And if you didn't, I guess it was back to the factory. The main takeaway, however, is that these early lunch programs represented an important part of the broader campaign to support working-class families and keep children in school, not in the factory. It wasn't perfect, but it was the start of the school lunch programs we know now. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Now let's fast forward a few decades. With the world entering the 20th century, school lunches started to change in new and exciting ways. Well, exciting for some. By the early 1900s, things started to get a little more organized. We see the first hints of what would become the cafeteria system we know today, as schools started to get more formalized meal plans. However, it wasn't all fresh fruit and salad bars yet. But let's take a look at how school lunches changed shape, literally and figuratively, in the early 20th century. As we leave the 19th century behind and step into the 1900s, we have to ask, how did school lunch look in an age when industrialization was booming and social reforms were just beginning? Well, if you thought cafeteria mystery meat was tough, the early 20th century wasn't winning any culinary awards either. However, this was a key time in the development of the school lunch programs we have today. Now grab your tin lunch pails. We're headed back to the days of balanced meals, being bread in one hand and soup in the other. School lunch programs turned a corner in the early 20th century. As cities expanded and industrialization increased, more children attended public schools in urban areas. But here's the thing. Families, especially working-class ones, weren't always able to pack lunches, and kids still needed to eat. The school lunch program began to take off in the early 1900s. In the 1910s and 1920s, American cities began to serve school lunches. Meals were simple, meant to feed bellies, not tease taste buds. Stews, beans, bread and milk. Hearty, but not Instagram-worthy. You might get a piece of meat or even a boiled potato if you were lucky. Yum, right? This was a big deal back then. These meals were lifesavers for children who might not have eaten during the school day. Even some forward-thinking regions, such as New York City, took it a step further. As part of larger health and nutrition initiatives, they started to offer free or subsidized meals to poor children. Imagine being a kid in the 1920s, waiting in line for your daily dose of stew, knowing that this program was one of the few things keeping your family afloat. Food was all about survival. In some places, schools even experimented with providing lessons on nutrition. Yep, kids were learning about the food pyramid while eating meals that were, well, a little wobbly on the balanced part of the equation. But hey, at least they tried. Families were struggling just to put food on the table during the 1930s, and it was a tough time for just about everyone. This often meant arriving at school hungry, or not arriving at all, depending on the time of day. Hunger was not just a personal problem, but a national problem. It was so bad that the U.S. government finally started to recognize that school lunch programs were a way to deal with widespread poverty and malnutrition. Many schools upped their lunch game, or at least tried, during this time. Soup kitchens and community organizations stepped in, serving simple but nutritious meals to students. Common staples were soups, sandwiches, milk, and occasionally a fruit or vegetable. It wasn't fancy, but it kept kids going. It was also a time when seeds were planted for more formalized federal involvement. The Great Depression essentially served as a wake-up call. Kids didn't eat, they couldn't learn, and if they couldn't learn, the future workforce would suffer. Talk about high stakes for a bowl of soup. The Great Depression was a struggle that paved the way for a large change in the way school lunches were handled. By the 1940s, it was clear that school lunch programs were no longer nice to have, but were essential. Then there's the National School Lunch Act of 1946, which officially brought federal assistance for school lunch programs. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. However, by the late 1930s and early 1940s, schools were already starting to take steps to make sure children were being fed meals that met basic nutritional standards. While these standards may not have included the modern food pyramid, they were at least trying to offer a balance of proteins, grains, and a few produce items. Consider simple, hearty meals that will fuel young minds and bodies. It was also the time when school lunches became more structured. Programs started to come together under broader guidelines, rather than haphazard efforts by individual schools or charities. The cafeterias we recognize today started looking a lot more like schools. So, where do we go from here? As we enter the 1940s, World War II brought new challenges and opportunities for school lunches. How did rationing and food shortages impact what kids ate in schools? And what changes did the post-war boom bring to the cafeteria table? Let's stop for a moment and imagine the chaos of the 1940s and 1950s. Rationing was on, kids had to eat, and World War II was raging. So, here's the big question. What do you feed a classroom full of children with stretched-thin food supplies? Governments around the world came together to make it happen, although it was not easy. World War II didn't just change the world, it changed what kids ate at school if they had a school to attend. With so many families focused on the war effort, governments realized that children needed to be healthy and fed. These kids were the next generation of workers after all, and their health was a national interest. During the war, school lunch programs expanded greatly in the United States and Europe. Rationing was a major challenge, but it also inspired creativity. To provide children with the energy to learn, and maybe help with a victory garden after school, meals had to be high in calories and high in nutrients, especially protein and carbohydrates. It wasn't fancy, but it was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and bread, and it did the job. Powdered eggs and canned meat from United States wartime aid programs were even served in some schools in Britain. International cuisine to talk about. These meals, jokes aside, were important in helping to boost morale during a difficult time. Let's not forget the messaging. School lunches were a way for governments to teach kids about nutrition and the importance of helping out in the war effort. Picture a classroom where the teacher says, "Eat all your peas, it's patriotic." After the war was over, the world began rebuilding, and school lunches were no exception. The National School Lunch Act of 1946 was a game changer in the United States. This landmark legislation officially funded school lunch programs, set federal guidelines for meals, and made them available in public schools across America. So what was on the menu? Staples of the typical post-war school lunch included meat, potatoes, bread, vegetables, and sometimes milk or juice. If you're thinking of a traditional meat and potatoes meal, you're correct. Hearty and nutritious. These lunches were designed to help a new generation of kids grow up and take on the world, or at least recess. Another huge factor in the expansion of school lunch programs was the rise of the middle class. The demand for standardized meals grew as more families could afford to educate their children. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, cafeterias had become a mainstay in schools throughout the United States, providing meals that were mostly balanced and budget-friendly. A curious quirk of this era was the effort to make school lunches educational. Even if the results weren't always exciting, nutritionists worked closely with schools to make sure meals followed the latest dietary guidelines. What if a kid in 1950 asks, "Do we really need boiled cabbage again?" The answer was always yes. We should pause to admire the ingenuity of post-war school lunches. Cafeteria workers learned to stretch a dollar with limited ingredients and tight budgets. Meat that was left over turned into casseroles, bread heels into croutons, and milk that was just about to expire? Perfect for pudding. Some schools even tried to introduce international dishes such as spaghetti or chili to give students a taste of other countries. These were the first foods many kids had encountered outside the meat and potatoes spectrum. School lunches were about to get a major makeover by the time the 1960s rolled around. Government regulations would change the landscape of the cafeteria, along with the rise of processed foods. And don't forget the cultural changes like Jell-O salad. Can you recall the experience of eating pizza at school for the first time? Whether it was a sad rectangle of cheese and sauce or a surprisingly decent slice, it probably wasn't just luck. Major changes came to school lunches during the age between the 1960s and the 1980s under the impact of emerging trends and governmental intervention. The 1960s were the years of the change, and the change affected even school lunches, which were not as healthy as before. The government stepped up efforts to control what children were fed at school due to growing concern for children's health. The USDA came in with better standards, ensuring that school foods were portioned with fruits, vegetables, milk, and meats. But let's be honest, still, not all kids were happy with these changes. Picture a cafeteria worker placing canned peas on your tray while you were praying for a pizza to happen. That miracle was just around the corner. Talking of pizza, it is also important to note that during the 1960s, cultures were brought into lunch trays. Tacos, spaghetti, and of course pizza became part of the menu in school canteens during the last decade. These were not mere cameos added to the menu. They were a result of a diversifying America. Also, kids were more likely to eat something that did not resemble food pyramid diagrams at all. This era was the start of schools using meals to familiarize children with various foods across the world. Yes, tacos could have been ground beef in a hard shell with cheese on top, but hey, they were on the right track. Finally, by the early 1970s, school nutrition programs had found keys to success, or at least are attempting to. One of the most important milestones we can notice is the beginning of the school breakfast program, which was an enlargement of governmental intervention aimed at provision of meals to children. Anyway, as every teacher will remind you, children can hardly concentrate on lessons if they are hungry. However, what was happening at breakfast was a much healthier change, while lunch was experiencing a transition that was highly related to fast foods. Fast foods such as hamburgers, potato chips, and of course, pizzas were familiar images in school canteens. Soon, children were swapping their apples for more ketchup sachets. This was also the period when cafeteria menus began to look like drive-through menus. On the one hand, it was good news for those who did not like fancy dining and just wanted a burger and fries. At the same time, people discussed the quality of school meals to be lowered with the help of this method. It was claimed that the growth of processed foods was threatening the nutritional content of lunches and creating a constant controversy as to what should be offered to schools. Let's not forget the 1970s most iconic school lunch accessory, the partitioning of the lunch tray. It's an actual live television dinner on a plate. There are designated places for each food item, such as peas in one corner, Salisbury steak in another, and pudding in yet another place, because no one wanted their chocolate pudding to mix with the mashed potatoes. It seems that the 1980s just grabbed everything the 1970s had to offer and cranked the dial up to the max. School lunches were changing as fast food culture was growing more and more popular. Children could get little cheeseburgers, chicken nuggets, and French fries, but they were cafeteria size. Food was convenient, tasty, and often unhealthy, the epitome of what would later be called junk food. By now, the complaints regarding the quality of school lunches were becoming louder. It also led parents and other health-conscious fellows to begin asking about the safety of processed foods and high-sugar content beverages. Some even asked for change, claiming schools prepare children to be junk food eaters. However, the 1980s were not completely a disaster for the school lunches. Attempts to feed the students better persisted at the staff level. Some schools even tried to implement the salad bar and fresh fruits. Yes, of course, most children did not pay much attention to the salad bar, but it was available in case they wanted it. So, what did a typical school lunch look like during this period? If you were growing up in the 1970s or 1980s, you probably had a cheeseburger as your main meal, fries as your second meal, a carton of chocolate milk as your third meal. And if you were lucky or if your parents were wise enough to encourage healthy eating, then you had a fruit cup as your dessert. Balanced? Not exactly. Delicious? For sure. This was also the time we saw those defining school lunch foods like rectangular pizzas and fish sticks. But there were also sweet dishes. Pudding cups and Jell-O were a staple. When the 90s approached, the school lunches were poised for their most radical change yet. From the conversion to more healthful fare to childhood obesity as a national issue, the cafeteria was on the brink of radical change, and we can imagine that vending machines would never look the same again. During the 1990s and 2000s, school lunches were in the crossfire between nutrition-conscious crusaders and fast food incursions. It was time to explore the age of moderation, the age of broccolis and burgers. Was it not the time of the oversized jeans, boy bands, and oh yes, of course, when someone actually worked out that children were consuming far too much junk food? With the increase in childhood obesity, schools became a focal point of the war on obesity. The government followed up with the proper new nutritional policies meant to cut fats, sugars, and processed products in school lunches. And so, we entered the age of the salad bar. To some children, this was an improvement. For others, a salad bar was like seeing broccoli in their paradise. Do you mean that instead of pizza, I can take lettuce? Wow, how generous. But it wasn't just salads. This led to increased fruit choices and attempts at whole grain versions of foods such as bread and pasta in cafeterias. All of a sudden, the peanut butter and jelly sandwich you are eating is on whole wheat bread, and your macaroni has fiber? What a time to be alive. However, when these measures were in place, fast food continued to hold sway. Burgers, fries, and chicken nuggets continued to be cafeteria food, in part because it was cheap and they were what the children wanted to eat. Essentially, it turned cafeteria workers into wicked foes, the ones who attempted to convince the crowd to buy carrot sticks instead of fries. As we entered the new millennium, health consciousness did not merely remain dormant, it evolved. In response to the change in the quality of foods being provided in school, they came up with the provision of organic and local foods. In some districts, industrial agriculture was no longer farmed out to individuals or companies for processed food delivery to school cafeterias. It had farm-to-table. Farm-to-table is a concept of sourcing and preparation of food, were largely sourced from nearby farms and with little or no processing. The concept here is to focus on locally grown fresh and organic produce that is in season, since the transport of food over long distances has negative effects on the environment. Also at the same time, other legislation like the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 introduced more stringent standards of calorie ranges, sodium, and fat in school meals. This act was not just what's on your tray, it was a revolution in the organization and preparation of school meals. Here's an example of the kind of transformation that took place. The once beloved slice of greasy pizza? Now it might come with a whole grain crust, reduced fat cheese, or a sauce that is laced with vegetables. Sneaky, right? However, with the changes which included a focus on nutrition, the change was not always palatable. Another major concern in this same period was the overhead concern with upgrading cafeteria facilities. Schools began to put their money where their mouth is, buy proper, better-equipped kitchens, and begin to train the people preparing the meals to prepare more healthily. Over the years, they had stepped away from reheating just about everything from a can. Nonetheless, schools failed to achieve the optimal balance between nutrition and taste in school meals. And with good reason, kids are very demanding when it comes to entertainment. You could give them the best health-promoting, cholesterol-negligible, fat-free, vitamin-fortified meal in the world. But if it was not tasty, all of it could end up in the bin or be swapped for a biscuit. If you remember the infamous veggie burger experiment of the 2000s, yes, it was healthier, but how in the world was the cafeteria lady going to get an entire class of undisciplined students to eat their burgers and ditch the usual fries for beans? That was a tall order. At the same time, vending machines turned into interesting theaters themselves. During the 90s and the early years of the new millennium, they were filled with drinks and snacks such as sodas and chips that are more appealing than food in the cafeteria. In the latter half of the 2000s, the schools stopped serving junk foods in vending machines and instead provided bottled water, granola bars, and disappointment. But what did lunch look like during that period? The kids born in the 90s might have recognized most of the meals and snacks they saw on screen, though, with some differences. Pizza, chicken nuggets, and sandwiches as always, whereas salads and fresh fruit cups seem to be relatively new inventions. In the 2000s, your tray may contain a turkey wrap and whole grain bread, baby carrots as a side dish, and low-fat milk. In the same way, changes were made in desserts. Goodbye, sugary pudding cups. Hello, fruit parfaits with yogurt and granola. If that sounds like something from your local cafe, you're not wrong. Cafeterias were trying to up their game. This was not just about altering what kids consume, but altering that young brain's perception of food. This led to nutrition education programs which assumed a regular slot in many schools, with children being taught on matters to do with diet and nutrition. However, this new shift also posed some problems. A few children accepted these changes and adapted to remain in the program, while others looked for means to penetrate the program. Swapping banana for someone's cookie? Classic. A lot of groundwork for even more radical changes in school lunch programs was set in the 1990s and 2000s. But how did school meals transform with the advent of new technologies, environmentally friendly ways of producing delicious meals, and even celebrity endorsement? What would the child inside you say if offered kale chips, quinoa bowls, or online meal prep orders? School lunches have gone a long way from being the famous mystery meat and the soggy pizza slice, to that which can even fit into an Instagram post. But how did we get here? Now it is about time to focus on what manner the 2010s to today marked a new epoch in the cafeteria experience. School food service by the early part of 2010 was already in full support of the health revolution. Bury the tombstone of the time when ketchup was recognized as a vegetable? Yes, this actually occurred. From there, attention turned to how lunches were both more nutritious and also more environmentally friendly. Changing toward healthier lunches is based on using fresher, organic, and raw elements in meals. Others we saw emerging included farm to school, where the freshest produce sourced directly from farms arrived in cafeteria trays. Whoever said that the phrase eating seasonal only applied to certain individuals, especially the food lovers, was dead on wrong, at least from a third-grade student's perspective. Just try to think about a kid who swears, "No thanks, apples are so last season." Vegetarian and vegan meals were introduced in the cafeteria mainly because meal preferences were changing and there were more people with restricted diets. Vegan mac and cheese? It's a thing now. Students with food allergies could also get allergen-free meals that did not make them sit alone during their meals. It also became a trend to make facilities environment-friendly during this period. Some schools introduced practices like not wasting food, encouraging the use of eco-friendly packaging materials, and even recycling leftover food. To enrich students' knowledge of real food, some schools went a little further in making on-site gardens available for students. It could be something as simple as eating a salad in which you contemplate to yourself, "I grew this lettuce myself." Still, the drive to go green and to be healthy has its own set of issues to boot as well. The youngsters who grew up having fast food sometimes did not accept quinoa salads well at first. For example, preparing appealing food when working in a cafeteria often presented a major challenge because cafeteria workers had to be very innovative. Now let's talk tech. The 2010s reincarnation of the daily phenomenon of school lunches introduced a digital factor to the process. Do you recall waiting in line with your tray while hoping the cafeterias have not exhausted your preferred type of beverage? Well, now children in some schools can order their meals in advance through the internet. The use of technologies in the form of apps and tools has helped minimize disorder or complexity in managing cafeterias. From this app, parents can log in to an area where they can see what the weekly menu is going to look like. They can view the nutritional values of the food and even view what their children are eating. This means that the days of hiding cookies from mom and getting away with it are gone. Diets have also incorporated technology into their systems of feeding society. Thus, some schools have adopted the method whereby children use ID cards or even just applications to pay for meals instead of pocket money. Of course, this also wipes out the traditional get-out clause of, "I left my lunch money at home." Kids, we're on to you. The last advantage resulting from the application of these technologies is the flexibility of the tools. Students can order meals that they would like to consume and in the proportions of their choice. Picture a cafeteria where you can order your lunch just like at Chipotle. Want extra veggies? Done. Double cheese? No problem. It's Cafeteria 2.0. Well, if we want to know what school lunch looks like these days, let's take a closer look. This means global flavors, healthier options, and sure enough, some loved comfort foods. It might be easy to find grilled chicken wrap, vegetable sushi, chickpea curry, spaghetti, tacos, and even soft-baked cookies. Packets of milk are now accompanied by other products such as almond or oat milk. The fries may be baked, not fried, and desserts usually contain fruit rather than frosting. For schools implementing the concept of farm-to-table practices, trays could contain such items as roasted farm produce or even fresh strawberries in spring. Some schools have gone to extremes that have even included Meatless Monday, where different types of plant products such as lentil burgers or tofu stir-fry have been part of the school's diet. Do not let the quinoa and kale fool you, though. It is not all that glamorous.
So your typical idea of a cake might be a baked delight with flour and frosting, but what about fish cakes, such as crab cakes? They need some love too. Luckily, they have enjoyed their fair share of spotlight in the days of our parents and their parents, and they work in many ways. A nutritional snack to amp up your diet, something to pair up with a good dip and bread or other seafood, or just a delicious meal all over for munching on. Grandmas would always get to work on making their best fish cake with just simple ingredients like breadcrumbs and crab meat, and the fresher the crustacean, the better the cooking. These crab cakes made the rounds pretty regularly in places like Maryland and Ohio or Mississippi, where fishing for crabs was really common. Fried chicken patties were introduced to American schools in the 1980s and quickly became a favorite due to their similarity to popular fast food. These patties are made from ground chicken mixed with spices, then breaded with flour and breadcrumbs to create a crispy outer layer. The frying process transforms these prepared patties into golden, crunchy delights with a juicy interior, typically served as sandwiches or with sides like fries. The method of preparing these patties is well suited to the high-volume requirements of school cafeterias, involving simple steps that can be executed quickly: mixing, forming, breading, and frying. This efficiency ensures that delicious hot meals can be served promptly, reducing wait times and maximizing student satisfaction during lunch breaks. Of frozen TV dinners, chicken pot pie rose to fame in the 1950s when pre-made lunches were the new trend. Chicken pot pie was advertised as a convenient lunch that could feed a whole family without any culinary effort. It definitely helped that the pie was a marvel, taste-wise. Think of a flaky pastry crust filled with chicken, vegetables, and creamy sauce. If your mouth is watering right now, just imagine how attracted families were by this pre-made lunch. Chicken pot pie was a lunch classic in households by the late 1950s, with almost every house having it as lunch at least once a week. Alas, as most processed frozen foods have downfalls, chicken pot pie also lost its footing in the pre-made market. Items like Lunchables and frozen fried foods gained more traction through TV advertisements, and chicken pot pie was replaced on the lunch table. Speaking of wanting to watch your waistline while still feeling you are eating food meant for humans, roast beef finger sandwiches were the go-to for that genre of food because they ticked most boxes nutritionally while also having an explosive and vibrant taste. Something between a mid-work deli sandwich picked up from the corner of the street and an aromatic beef plate with veggies made by your grandmother, roast beef finger sandwiches offered the best of three worlds: size, taste, and health all in one, since they were usually served at brunches or bridal showers in a min sandwich format. Health-wise, they gave you more than just a good dose of protein, and that depended on what you would use as toppings. You could use olives, peppers, or other spices, as well as lettuce, tomatoes, and spinach. How do you prefer your sandwiches to be, mini or otherwise? Boiled hot dogs have been a long-standing favorite in American school cafeterias, known for their simple, tasty, and quick preparation. Made from a blend of beef and pork, these hot dogs are seasoned and boiled, served in a soft bun with a variety of condiments like ketchup, mustard, and relish. This cooking method is particularly effective in school environments as it allows for hot dogs to be prepared en masse and kept warm. The simplicity of boiled hot dogs makes them a reliable choice for school cafeterias, where the lunch period is often brief and the demand for quick service is high. Additionally, the familiarity and ease of customization of hot dogs meet diverse student preferences, making them a popular and comforting choice. This meal option not only satisfies hunger swiftly, but also aligns with the logistical needs of serving hundreds of students. Macaroni and cheese with tuna emerged as another budget-friendly lunch that delivered a unique taste to people. Inspired by tuna noodle casseroles, this dish was a seafood take on the classic macaroni and cheese. All people had to do was buy cheap canned tuna from the market and combine it with homemade macaroni and cheese, and in a few minutes, you had a filling meal. Considering seafood prices were roaring during the early 1940s and 1950s, tuna macaroni and cheese was adopted by people as a favorable lunch alternative to seafood items restaurants were serving. Soon enough, lunch tables across the states were using canned tuna as the main protein that enhanced the taste of their macaroni and cheese. Eventually, the food started losing fans as fresh seafood became cheaper in the states due to increased production. This led to a negative impact on the sales of canned tuna, and so tuna macaroni and cheese vanished from family tables. So Cobb salad was not actually made by a grandmother on the brink of innovation, but by Bob Cobb, who owned the famous chain of Brown Derby restaurants in LA and Hollywood, California. He made the chopped salad in 1937 and knew that America needed a salad with enough of the familiar stuff it was used to and enough of the healthy things it desperately needed. While they cannot take the credit for making it, grandmas all over the nation still rejoiced in delight when this fantastic dish did hit tables and restaurants all over. They finally had an easy, cheap, and quick way to get some much-needed nutrition into the family diet. All a Cobb salad takes is some boiled eggs, fried tomatoes, chicken, bacon, and other ingredients with a lettuce topping. You might think, why not throw in some spinach or kale, but we will get to some salads that use those too. For this one, lettuce worked the best with the textures of the meat that were in there. Salisbury steak was incorporated into school menus in the 1960s, providing a hearty and appealing option. Named after Dr. James H. Salisbury, who advocated a meat-centric diet, it features ground beef mixed with eggs, breadcrumbs, and spices, shaped into patties and simmered in gravy. This method of preparation allows for bulk cooking, ideal for school settings where efficiency and volume are necessary. Salisbury steak offers significant nutritional value with its high protein content, making it a satisfying meal that supports the physical needs of growing students. The gravy not only adds flavor, but also keeps the patties moist and appealing throughout the serving period. Its rich flavor and tender texture have made it a favorite among students, ensuring it remains a popular choice in school cafeterias. Moving on, we have the green bean casserole, which makes for a healthy lunch that was often served at holiday dinner. As the name suggests, this dish was a casserole made with green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and a hearty topping of crispy fried onions. Green bean casserole's recipe emerged from the Campbell Soup Company in 1955, which had long been producing canned cream of mushroom soups. They introduced the recipe as a way to increase sales of their newest soup, and this strategy was an instant success. Nearly 40% of their soups were sold to create the green bean casserole in both homes and restaurants. The dish remained a part of Thanksgiving lunches for a long while, before eventually households replaced it with a Thanksgiving casserole that had bits of everything we see on a Thanksgiving table. So far, we have two solid options for salads with a sandwich variation for one of them, but what if you do not like protein in your salads? Want them on the sweeter, more dessert-y side? Then molded cranberry orange salads have your name written on them wrapped up in a bow. Some normal or raspberry gelatin and frozen cranberries, plus apples and oranges cut into wedges, would make for an incredibly sweet and delightful salad that had everything you wanted in it taste-wise. It also did wonders for your skin with a steady supply of vitamins and the benefits of cranberries. So not only would grandmothers make this for their beloved families, but they would sneak a bowl on the side for themselves too. Despite the ingredients being relatively easy to get, this was more of an upper-class dish popular in affluent areas. Tater tots were born out of innovation in 1953 by the founders of Ida Golden and Francis Neefy Grigg. Utilizing leftover potato scraps from their French fry production, they created a new snack by chopping these remnants finely, mixing them with flour and seasonings, and forming them into small cylinders before deep frying them to a golden crisp. This process not only provided an efficient solution to food waste, but also produced a snack that was perfectly crispy on the outside while remaining fluffy inside. Tater tots are particularly popular as a side dish, but can also feature in recipes like casseroles, making them a versatile component of school lunches. The method of preparing tater tots involves deep frying, which, while requiring careful temperature control to achieve the perfect crunch without burning, fits well within the capabilities of large kitchen operations in schools. Continuing the trend of sandwiches, we bet you have never heard of a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Recognized to be a sandwich that emerged as a twist on the classic peanut butter and jelly, this is just one of the many variations of sweet lunches famous in America. Staying true to the name, you grilled your regular peanut butter and jelly sandwich to produce a warm, melted, and gooey sandwich. You cannot really go wrong with peanut butter and jelly as your main condiments, so the new version of this old sandwich gained popularity throughout many states. Coming across a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich nowadays is a rarity, as the sandwich's popularity decreased as a lunch item. This is due to how time-consuming grilling the sandwich was. This next one is also a fusion of two different classics, so it is kind of a new take on both, just like macaroni casseroles. But have you ever thought about what a meatloaf burger would look like? It's not just something you might think about on a boring Saturday. It's a tried-and-true combo that has been around for ages. People may not know about it on a mainstream level nowadays, but it has been a local top 5 dish in states like Washington, New York, and Arkansas. Everyone in America loves a good meatloaf, and back in the days of our grandparents, it was one of the most common homemade lunches. What was one of the most regularly eaten takeout options? Burgers. Hamburgers, cheeseburgers, double patty behemoths, you name it. People ate it, and eventually they wanted to see what else could be done with the burger format, which works all too well. Lo and behold, the meatloaf burger made a name for itself rather quickly as a very filling and delicious meal to whip up at home. Sloppy Joes have been a staple in American school cafeterias since their introduction in the mid-20th century. This dish features ground beef or pork that is sautéed with onions and garlic until browned, then simmered in a savory tomato-based sauce seasoned with Worcestershire sauce and other spices. The thick, hearty mixture is then spooned onto soft hamburger buns, creating a filling and flavorful sandwich that is both messy and delightful to eat. The preparation requires minimal kitchen equipment and ingredients that are staples in most school pantries, making it a cost-effective choice for feeding a large number of students. Moreover, the ability to prepare the meat mixture ahead of time and quickly assemble the sandwiches during busy lunch periods enhances its practicality. The familiarity of the flavors, combined with the satisfying nature of the sandwich, ensures that Sloppy Joes remain a cherished option within school meal programs. We have dishes here that are fit for parties, family gatherings, and lunches, but what about something that works as a lunch and can be served at a wedding? Cucumber party sandwiches are exactly what we are referring to. And if you thought a dish that could work on both your couch and next to your best friend in their wedding did not exist, think again. Maybe you do not think too highly about cucumbers, and we would not blame you. Recently, not a lot of hit dishes have made much use of them. That explains why these went out of style. But tracking back just a few decades ago, it was a pretty common sight to see a long table lined up with cucumbers, layered between herb cream cheese fillings, lemon juice sprinkled all over, sitting in the middle of 2 perfectly toasted slices of bread. Fish sticks became part of the school lunch menu shortly after their commercial introduction in the 1950s. Made from white fish like cod or pollock, these sticks are cut into manageable pieces, breaded and then deep-fried or baked to create a crispy exterior with a tender and flaky interior. This preparation method not only makes fish sticks easy to eat, but also appealing to the palates of young students who may otherwise be reluctant to consume fish. The breading, often seasoned with spices and herbs, adds a savory flavor that complements the mild taste of the fish, making it a popular choice in school cafeterias. Fish sticks are typically served with tartar sauce or ketchup and a side of vegetables, providing a balanced meal with proteins, carbs, and vitamins. Their ease of preparation, including the ability to cook them from frozen, aligns well with the needs of large-scale meal production typical in schools. Stuffed potato pancakes are a delight to have on their own, but they go great with any kind of syrup or dip too. And if you had grandkids coming over and did not know what to make, this was a surefire bet. Potatoes have always been a massive staple of American cuisine and culture, partly because they form the basis of many simple, affordable dishes. An example of this is how in the Depression there were several potato-based dishes that people regularly adopted, and they stuck in the cultural landscape of American cooking much longer after the dust from the recession had settled. In states like Ohio, Oregon, and Idaho, it is still common to see potato-centered dishes taking the #1 spot. So imagine the rounds they made back when they were truly in style. Taking a break away from the McDonald's and the Wendy's, stuffed potato pancakes usually have bits of meat stuffed in them like sausages, pork, or ground beef. And it is not only packed with flavor, but a great dish to eat if you are looking to bulk up too. Grandma does know best, after all. Creamed corn is prepared by cooking sweet corn kernels until tender and then mixing them with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and a thickener such as flour or cornstarch. Seasoned lightly, usually with salt and pepper, and sometimes enhanced with sugar to bring out the natural sweetness of the corn, creamed corn is a favorite in school cafeterias for its smooth, slightly sweet flavor profile that appeals to young eaters. This dish serves as an excellent way to incorporate vegetables into students' diets in a form that is generally more palatable to children who may be picky eaters. Its popularity in schools is reinforced by its nutritional content, offering a good source of fiber and vitamins while being gentle on young stomachs. Creamed corn's ability to be kept warm in serving trays without losing texture or flavor makes it particularly suited to the cafeteria setting, where dishes need to remain appealing throughout the serving period. Another wonderful appetizer was broiled Parmesan tomatoes, which were ready in about half an hour and were the ideal sidekick for some boiled or fluffy eggs alongside biscuits. Fresh, ripe summer tomatoes, filled with concentrated flavor, topped with an olive oil spray and kosher salt, sound like a really good time, not to mention the main selling point. The Parmesan cheese added so much flavor and style to this that it became a trending option in the mid-90s and was a frequent sight in many cookbooks in the States, especially those aimed at housewives and home chefs. Many of Grandma's broiled Parmesan tomato recipes are available online, showing how they have stood the test of time and continue to be passed down within families. Macaroni and cheese loaf emerged as a popular variation in the 1970s when schools sought to diversify their menu offerings while still providing comforting and familiar foods. This dish takes the beloved elements of traditional macaroni and cheese, a mixture of cooked macaroni and creamy cheese sauce, and adds eggs and breadcrumbs to bind the ingredients into a solid loaf that can be easily sliced. The loaf is baked until the exterior is slightly crispy and golden, offering a textural contrast to the soft, cheesy interior. This format not only makes serving more efficient, but also reduces food waste, as the loaf can be cut into precise portions. Fast food gained a lot of popularity in America during the 1940s, so it is not surprising that chili cheese dogs are next on our list. Hot dogs topped with homemade chili and melted cheese were sold at just about every roadside cart to people looking for a quick lunch. Best for workers who had short breaks, chili cheese dogs were the perfect balance of spices and flavors that would satisfy their hunger. In fact, the common man took such a liking to these hot dogs that several variations of a chili cheese dog recipe was released to the public in cooking sections of the daily newspaper. Soon after, chili cheese dogs were a comfort lunch served at family tables, with each house adding whichever toppings they preferred. You will not see this food served during family lunches anymore, because hot dogs today are reduced to their value as being a roadside food. This sandwich would go great with some fresh fruit fluff salad, which was perfect for all kinds of occasions. Casual brunches, bridal showers, birthdays, and holiday gatherings all felt a little incomplete in the northern areas of America without this fruit fluff salad. It was a pretty good summer dish, and it had an assortment of fruits that worked well and bounced off of each other's textures and tastes. Stuff like a creamy lemon base supplemented with fresh strawberries or blueberries was a typical standard for a fresh fruit fluff salad, but you could also get tropical with kiwis and pineapples. A lot of things worked, and the reason it goes great with a croquet madame is because ham was usually used as a topping for this dish too, so it was a great pairing. Croque madames involve layers of melted cheese smothered between freshly baked, crisp white bread. And to top it all off, there's an intense, smoky flavor from the ham. The best part about it is that it takes minutes to make, and it was one of the more fancy dishes that people would create when they were feeling like having a bit of an extravagant dinner. Everyone deserves to treat themselves sometimes, but for home chefs, especially grandparents, the biggest treat is often just seeing everyone eat up every last bite of what they've made. That was never a problem if croque madames were the dish being served, because nobody could resist this classic American sandwich that did more than its fair share of justice to ham. Poached or lightly fried eggs as a topping also made it work a lot better. And by the way, they are called croque madames because the poached eggs seem to resemble women's luxury hats in the 90s. Powdered milk in school cafeterias serves as a practical alternative to fresh milk, particularly valued for its extended shelf life and lower cost. This dehydrated dairy product is reconstituted by adding water. Powdered milk is often used not only as a beverage, but also as an ingredient in various recipes, from baked goods to mashed potatoes, enhancing their calcium and protein content. Although it may lack some of the flavor nuances of fresh milk, it remains an important nutritional component, offering essential nutrients such as vitamins D and A. The use of powdered milk in schools is driven by logistical advantages. It requires no refrigeration and can be stored for long periods, making it ideal for large-scale food service operations where efficiency and cost-effectiveness are priorities. Its inclusion in school meal programs ensures that students receive sufficient daily dairy intake, supporting their overall health and development within the constraints of school budgets. When Spam was stocked up on the shelves of grocery stores, Americans used it to create their favorite lunch, a Spam sandwich. Spam, spicy and ham nicknamed thus, was sold as canned processed meat in markets where it found unprecedented success due to the great taste and cheap price tag. Eating processed meat on its own, however, was not as appealing as creating a sandwich was, and hence Spam sandwich was invented. People would either fry or grill Spam and sandwich it between bread with various condiments to ensure the lunch would not taste dry. Immediately, the masses took a liking to the cheap lunch. Just about anyone could cook up a Spam sandwich and please their stomachs during lunchtime. The sandwich remained popular until Spam started developing a bad reputation for having twice the amount of recommended fats for a healthy diet. This caused people to steer away from the processed meat. Ambrosia fruit salads are one of the finest ones on this list so far, and they had all kinds of fancy and fresh ingredients to get the party going. You would not think yogurt, mandarin oranges, pineapples, mini marshmallows, and coconut could synchronize so well, especially in a dish like a salad. But they were a crowd favorite for lunch dates and home cooking. Some whipped cream on the top made it a very creamy and delightful option to go for if you wanted to watch the calories and still enjoy yourself. Think of it as like a Watergate salad without the pistachio. Some Hawaiian home chefs would mix this with a typical Hawaii salad, which usually also had bananas and cherries, as well as cottage cheese. Which would you prefer if you saw both sitting pretty on a salad bar? Bread pudding offers a creative solution for utilizing leftover bread in school cafeterias, turning potential waste into a delectable dessert. This dish is typically prepared by cubing stale bread and soaking it in a mixture made from milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, which infuses it with rich flavors and a soft texture. Often, additions like raisins or cinnamon are mixed in to enhance the taste and appeal of the pudding. Bread pudding is then baked until the top layer caramelizes into a golden crust, contrasting beautifully with the creamy custard-like interior. This dessert is particularly popular in schools due to its economical benefits and the comfort it provides to students. The warm, sweet nature of bread pudding makes it a welcomed treat, encouraging students to partake in school meals while providing them with a source of energy. Going back to hearty lunch meals, pot roast is a family lunch that was made in homes using whichever ingredient was available at the time. Historically, pot roast can be traced back to Europe, where peasants and working-class homes regularly ate this lunch. Made using tougher cuts of meat and commonly available vegetables, America adopted this recipe as their own during the Great Depression. Economic perils allowed for pot roast to be a part of lunch tables, as people would use just about any vegetables and protein they could find. The most popular recipe was slow-cooked beef with carrots and potatoes topped with gravy. With the economic situation in the States improving, pot roast lost significant popularity amongst consumers as necessity was no longer something they had to factor into their cooking. Speaking of much-needed digestive health, apple salads did just that and were a commonly used weapon in the culinary arsenal of parents everywhere. A delectable apple salad with Honeycrisp apples, dried cranberries, some pecans and grapes would make for a unique salad that could easily serve as an impromptu appetizer for a party or a star on a well-equipped salad bar. A slightly sweetened mayonnaise dressing also did a lot for this dish. And if you did not vibe too much with mayo as a dressing, you could always switch to French or ranch dressings. People used all kinds of apples besides Honeycrisp ones, such as Fuji apples or Braeburn apples or Granny Smith apples. The idea was to commit to some serious trial and error because the small difference in apples meant a lot for the dish. Creamed spinach in school cafeterias combines nutritional value with palatable presentation, making it a favored vegetable dish among students. The preparation starts with fresh or frozen spinach, which is thoroughly washed and then cooked down until it wilts. A creamy sauce made from a blend of milk, flour, and butter is prepared separately, seasoned with a hint of nutmeg or garlic to enrich the flavor profile. The spinach is then incorporated into the sauce, which gently coats the leaves, creating a smooth and appealing texture. This dish not only adds a vibrant color to the plate, but also increases the intake of greens in students' diets, providing essential nutrients like iron, vitamin A, and calcium. The combination of creamy texture and mild flavors often helps to introduce and encourage a preference for vegetables among younger children, supporting school nutrition programs in their goal to foster healthier eating habits. Canned food was seemingly a fan favorite back in the day, as SpaghettiOs are the next forgotten lunch we want to bring back. Campbell's Soup Company took notice of the popularity pasta was gaining as a lunch food in the 1960s and invented SpaghettiOs. Sold for cheap in supermarkets, the dish was a basic tomato sauce with circular pasta rings instead of spaghetti noodles. SpaghettiOs were convenient and budget-friendly. Thus, they rapidly became a lunch staple for many people who needed a quick meal. Parents preferred giving their children SpaghettiOs because they were less messy, and children enjoyed the circular shape. Eventually, SpaghettiOs became a forgotten lunch as newer, easy-to-make lunches, like Kraft macaroni and spaghetti, came along. People simply did not enjoy the taste of canned spaghetti and moved on from the iconic SpaghettiOs. Tuna salad made a fresh comeback, which helped extend its shelf life in the American homemade breakfast or lunch scene. The tuna salad everyone was already pretty accustomed to was reconstructed, this time with seasonal and tropical fruits like apples or cranberries and served in fresh pita sliced in half. Not only was this really healthy, but it was also intensely high in protein and carbs, so it helped you build that all-important muscle while keeping you full until a suitable time in the evening. Cannot give in to those post-meal munchie cravings, right? Tuna salad was great served as is, but some people would go a step further by baking it for a while too. Peanut butter and jelly bars take the quintessential American sandwich and transform it into a dessert format that is both nostalgic and delicious. This treat is prepared by layering a base of crumbly, buttery dough in a baking dish, spreading a generous amount of peanut butter and then jelly over the base, and topping it with more of the crumbly dough. The bars are then baked until the topping is lightly browned, resulting in a dessert that is rich in flavor and has a satisfying texture contrast between the soft filling and the crunchy topping. These bars incorporate the familiar flavors of peanut butter and jelly in a form that is easy to distribute and consume, making them an excellent addition to school lunch menus. Peanut butter and jelly bars not only provide a source of energy, but also bring a sense of comfort and nostalgia to the dining hall. Remember when we said that there are salads that use spinaches and kale? Welcome to the wedge salad, which uses spinach, lettuce, and kale with a blue cheese dressing to make one of the most impeccable salads you have ever had. If a home cook ever wanted to stun the crowd at a summer party or a Thanksgiving lunch, this wedge salad was the go-to option for stealing the show. Plus, the best part was that it was ready in just about 15 minutes. For the finish, you would sprinkle tomatoes, onion, and bacon on each part of the salad to add a delightful and much-needed crunch to go along with the greens. Would you try this? It certainly meets a lot of health needs that people have. American chop suey is a comfort food classic that has found a niche in American school cafeterias, combining practicality with palatability. This dish melds ground beef, elbow macaroni, and a tomato-based sauce seasoned with onions and bell peppers, all simmered together to allow the flavors to fully integrate. The preparation begins with sautéing onions and bell peppers until they are soft, adding the ground beef to brown, and then incorporating the cooked macaroni and tomato sauce. This mixture is seasoned with herbs such as oregano or basil, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce for deeper flavor complexity. American chop suey is particularly valued in school settings for its ability to be made in large volumes economically, using ingredients that are staples in most school kitchens. It's also well suited for holding and serving over extended periods, which is essential in a busy cafeteria environment. Corned beef and cabbage offers a cultural touchstone in school menus, particularly around St. Patrick's Day, providing a festive and educational meal. This dish involves slow-cooking corned beef in a spiced brine until it is tender, then adding chunks of cabbage that cook until just tender, absorbing the rich flavors of the meat. Corned beef and cabbage is not only a nod to cultural heritage, but also a balanced meal, offering a good mix of protein and vitamins from the cabbage. In school settings, this dish serves as a special menu item that can educate students about international cuisine while providing a nutritious and flavorful meal. Its preparation, while requiring more time than some other dishes, is relatively straightforward and can be executed with basic kitchen equipment, making it feasible for special occasions in schools. Tuna salad has managed to stand the test of time pretty well, and it gets even more simple than ham salad does. It is great that grandmas back then were always around to shatter misconceptions around how salad is an incredibly bland and boring concept. The ways they made these salads would get even the most stubborn, protein-only diehard on the bandwagon. You would be surprised what onion, celery, some spices, and mayo can do to tuna. It is an incredible comfort food classic, and it works with freshly caught tuna or canned tuna. Back in the 1900s, basic dressings were most commonly used, but towards the late 90s, stuff like Dijon dressings also got really popular, and they only made it healthier because you would find it much easier to eat an extra bowl or two. Which do you prefer if you remember growing up with this? Potato patties are a creative and delicious way to utilize leftover ingredients, transforming simple mashed potatoes into something special. Mixed with eggs and a little flour to help bind them, seasoned with salt, pepper, and often additional flavors like finely chopped onions or herbs, these patties are then shaped into rounds. The next step involves pan-frying them in a little oil until each side turns golden brown and crispy, creating a delightful contrast to the soft interior. Each batch can be made efficiently, serving many students without requiring extensive cooking time. They can be featured as a vegetarian entree or a side dish, complemented by various dips and sauces that enhance their flavor. This versatility makes them an invaluable addition to the school menu. Corned beef hash with eggs was popularized in the States after World War II when rationing meat was a common practice. One of state's biggest food processing companies, the Hormel Company, claims they bought corned beef hash to America in the 1950s and jump-started the invention of corned beef hash recipes. Since acquiring fresh meat was getting harder in the post-war era, people used corned beef to create a hash lunch. The recipe was simple. All you had to do was dice corned beef, mix it with potatoes and onions, then add a poached or fried egg on top. Corned beef was not really a fan favorite as the peculiar taste did not appeal to many people. This meant that as soon as necessity was not driving people's cooking, they forgot all about corned beef hash with eggs.
Fast foods remain a common theme in the culinary sector, but there have been changes. Burgers and chicken nuggets, for example, are offered, but they are lean. School meals of the so-called new generation are not just about nourishment. They are about changing the way people approach eating. The majority of schools use their menus and diet services to provide nutrition education in addition to teaching children about where their meals are sourced from. In some instances, school lunches have been used as reform instruments. Anti-hunger efforts simply mean that students from some poor households are provided with free or even subsidized meals. And at long last, with universal free lunch programs starting to expand in some areas, the idea of free lunches is no longer taboo. However, the drive for new healthy and sustainable school meals has, of course, not been without challenges. Sometimes due to budgets, supply chain problems, or even differences in the preferences of students, it may be hard for schools to make everyone happy. But again, there is an issue with portion sizes. Better foods mean the portions get reduced, and this can lead to instances whereby active children feel they have been served little food. Quite frankly, kale salad is not going to power your dodgeball game. Yes, apps or other online tools could be useful, but they presuppose that the school or even the family has the necessary technology. The role of bridging these gaps nevertheless continues to be an issue to this date. The school lunch is therefore best described as a combination of the traditional and the radical, since it seeks to combine the past with the future. The childhood generation today is in a position where their lunch trays embrace what is achievable, not just what is available. Better food, less trash, and better nutrition knowledge. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe. Also, let us know in the comments which school lunch from the past you'd like to try.